This is At the Root of Knowledge, and welcome to part 2 of our episode on influence. In this part, Mr. Michael Scheck will be our guest once again, and we will talk about social influence. Welcome, Mr. Scheck.
Hi. Thank you.
Welcome, Daniel.
Hello.
So in this episode, we're continuing our previous episode on influence, and we're now talking about social influences. So I think we're starting with the influence of social media and how it affects our lives. Does anyone have any opening statements? Or
Well, that's a big topic.
it sure is.
And it seems to be one very prevalent in this day and age.
I would agree with that, especially with the two most recent generations.
Oh yeah, it wasn't around during my generation.
Mm-hmm. So
When
perhaps
I was younger.
right. So perhaps you can give us some insight as to the changes that social media has brought to our society and our culture.
Well, from what I see, with respect to what I notice, it seems to be a very big influence. Everybody seems to be in some form of a Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and there's even people have even committed suicide and other other bad things because of what somebody said of them on social media or what they posted about against them. And
Oh yeah, there's been school shootings over social media posts in the last couple years, and it's horrifying to see it happen. And it's interesting that something that you might brush off as a really insignificant post or something that you're saying is insignificant can affect someone in that way. And I think one of the worst parts about it is you don't have to take any accountability for it. There's no way of tracing it back to you unless, I mean, I guess if you have a Facebook profile, your name's out there, but
yeah,
there's ways around that for sure.
yeah, there's I mean, you can actually get accounts and set up aliases and other things like that, whether it's nefarious or just to hide your own identity, and you can basically post almost anything you want. I mean, and that account might be frozen. I know of a number of different people that have different accounts in case one gets frozen, and that way they keep their information on another account.
Right. Yeah, it's there is traceability. Like if you're friends with someone you know on Facebook, then you know where it's coming from. But like I've seen plenty of people's accounts get hacked. You know, I've been sent probably 3 dozen over the last few years messages from people that do not make any sense as to why this person would be sending me this message. And I've seen it on Instagram too. Plenty people get their accounts get hacked. It's like a very, very common thing. And I've even been sent like inappropriate stuff from people who've had their accounts hacked.
Ah. Yeah, that does seem to be a very big issue in today's age, especially I guess like we've said that social media in our age today is such a big influence, and not so much on the older generation or even the middle aged people, but more the younger generation, like 35 on down, because this is something that they've grown up with and grown apart. It has been a part of their life. That's their major connection with their friends and having all their entire life out there on their account, so to speak.
Yeah, and one thing that I think, at least in my experience with social media, was a really big detriment is that I found when I was using social media quite often, I became disconnected in a way when from people and like their achievements. And what I mean by that is I would hear about something on social media and then someone might tell me about it, and I wasn't nearly as excited as I should have been about it. Like, I would hear about someone graduating from college on social media, and then when I would talk to them about it, it was just kind of like, oh, I already heard about it, you know.
Well, that's yesterday's news.
Exactly. It's no big deal. And it's not always just with a positive announcement either. Sometimes it was like you'd hear about a shooting, and it's like, oh, well, that's everyday stuff now. We hear about it all the time, so we're just numb to it.
Yeah. I don't know how the younger generation feels. I mean, obviously, like you just said, I think that they're probably a little bit more numb to it. Myself, I've noted a few different times where I found out about a death of a good friend or somebody that I went to high school with through some social media outlet, and it wasn't so passive. I mean, it was something that's like, well, I found out about my past life and my friends in there through social media, where everyone else was, talking about it.
Right.
And it was. I took it a little bit more personal than just reading the newspaper and say, oh, this is new or that's new.
Mm-hmm.
So the social media effect on me is a little bit, maybe a little bit different because of my age gap with the younger generation.
Yeah, another thing that I would say is probably a lot different from you and young people is, there's like this this deep craving for, I guess, attention.
Attention, acceptance.
Yeah, attention, acceptance, and there's also this deep, in a lot of young people, I know it was true of myself, as particularly when I was not that much younger, it was much more tense, is, a curiosity, like a very, transitioning from being a adolescent to being a adult, there's a lot of curiosity that goes along with being a young person, wondering what it would be like to be an old person. There's obviously a lot of curiosity about, the opposite gender and stuff like that. And I think social media can have a very powerful effect on both of those things, the desire to communicate and have attention, and also, fulfill their curiosities. I don't know what you think about that.
Daniel, I've already been through that in my life, in past life, and I didn't have social media at the time, so it is kind of I mean, I can understand it from a distance. Getting into the weeds of it a little to say that the influence of these social medias on the younger generation, yeah, there's a lot of and quite a bit of both negative and positive influence, and when the way that I see the generations that have came up, particularly in the last two, there is the acceptance, the curiosity, and those other things that are most influential in an adolescent turning into adult's life, that it can have a very powerful effect, both negative and positive. But there's probably, a lot of what I see is a lot more negative, unfortunately. Not that I'm necessarily a pessimistic person. I consider myself more of a realist than either an optimist or a pessimist. But I understand where the negative connotations are more prevalent and likely to occur.
Yeah, and another thing is, like, there's with that curiosity and that desire to communicate intimately, deeply, and say how you feel and get acceptance and be curious, there's like no real, like we said, accountability. It's so much easier to send a message and say what there's a lot. For most people, I would say it's much easier to write a text and send a message about how you feel, especially if it's something sensitive, versus saying it yourself. And there's no accountability. You don't have to say it to their face, So I feel like a lot of people use social media as a means to say things that they normally wouldn't.
They wouldn't otherwise do if they had to do it in person. Yeah, a lot of pseudo.
Most definitely, I agree that it's easier to do it, and I think that is leading to a widespread trend where people are becoming more antisocial. And what I mean by that is antisocial, like in person. They're not interacting with people; they're interacting with their phones constantly, and it is taking away from the personal interaction of humans.
Yeah, the real and natural communication, that you get from talking to someone.
Yeah, there was a study or a report of some sort that came out that actually said that one form of communication considered an actual form of communication is texting. Between the younger generation, it's just as common, more common than it is to actually be talking.
Yes, but the big thing that I have against texting on a large scale is that it leaves so much out. Like there's no emotion inside of texting.
Correct. And
sort of putting a smiley face on there or something. Like
yeah, some emoji there.
Yeah. Sort of.
I think you can read whatever emotion you want to out of the text, and that's I think what makes it dangerous.
It's very impersonal.
Yes. And with that, now you have that widespread, and now my question is, what happens when people are coming and they're trying to communicate just by talking to each other? Do either of you, I think it does, do either of you think that it leads to people having a hard time expressing their emotions?
Expressing their emotions or expressing their thoughts?
Emotions first, then thoughts.
Well, I'm not sure. I am not sure. The influence of the social media into a person's developmental growth has probably been pretty strong, and I'd say in the last generation at least, probably the last two. And the development of a natural communication has probably been hampered. And more than likely, we'll see the effects of this 15, 20 years out, say if social media and the internet went down for good. Because you'd have a bunch of people that are looking around at each other going, trying to punch in a text and not being able to know how to talk. No, but I think that there is a gap there that could occur, and probably has occurred, whether we recognize it or not.
We've talked a lot about the potential negative stuff and, the things that are hairy and seem like they could be problematic. Some people might say, well, social media is a great thing. Provided it's free and open, you have a platform where everybody can give equal expression without consequence. Everybody has the floor.
Oh, that would be nice if that were true.
Yeah. Another thing that you could say is that social media is good for networking, like businesses. How they have
LinkedIn.
exactly LinkedIn, or a smaller scale on that is an app called Nextdoor, where you're linked to your local neighborhoods, and people can post things about jobs or things they need done. And I think there are positives to that, but it's very dangerous as well for all the reasons that we've previously stated, that you can get sucked into that world.
Yeah, I think influences aside, social media is a very dangerous trap if not treated correctly. I've done a number of different occupations in my life. I've had a number of different influences in my life, and one of the things that we'll end up talking about, music. That's what I originally went to college for, and that's what I got one of my associates in. But one of the other things that I have done is I've worked overseas for the government in both the State Department and the U.S. military, and it's very the places that you going under those type of contracts require a definite amount of not posting things, of not putting out information out there, of keeping a lot of your information offline, out of your social medias, because of the different hackers out there, the different people that are willing to take this information. And it's not just foreign entities. A lot of it can be found in our own borders, and also hackers, both foreign and domestic. The first instances I was talking about was respect to the government influences, or not the government influences, but the government, the different governments wanting to get whatever information they can that you might have from you to help them sabotage our government. But also the same thing applies in our own with respect to the NSA and our other agencies and bureaus here in the United States. There's way too much trust in a lot of areas that I see that say like with my generation, or even the generation that just came after me. There's a lot of trust because of it going from a more personal to an open, where everybody sees it. And if you're used to trusting in a small circle, and you try to apply that in a much larger circle, you're leaving yourself wide open for sabotage, on both in a personal and against your own person. I mean, your house, your home, your livelihood, and everything else, like your finances, name it.
One day, if you wanted to, I don't know, run for an office or be a big, business person, a CEO or whatever, I am sure like those people get vetted thoroughly, and all of that social media, and I mean more than just social media, go back to high school records, all that stuff's liable to come back and bite you if you're ever going to, swing a big bat,
Right,
if you will. And people hold that against you, I'm sure. I mean, I've heard plenty of stories about stuff from, political leaders' younger years coming back and being brought to light, like when they go to run for office or whatever.
I don't even think that it has to be a political office or a big job that you're going for. I've had it where I've just been applying for a job, and they've asked me the question, if we Googled your name, like, what would come up? Like, that was one of the interview questions. And it was just to see, like, what kind of presence do I have on a social media level. And I think that's good that they're doing that, because it forces you to have accountability for what you're saying. And you're not allowed to just post whatever, unless, of course, you have separate accounts and such.
Yeah, Yeah, that's hopefully nothing nefarious there, Phil.
Hopefully not.
Yeah, I mean that's one thing. Growing up, I've seen a lot of young people and seen a lot of stuff they put on social media, you know, on whatever Instagram, Snapchat, Facebook, and you know, pictures of them like at parties and like, you know, all types. It's like, what if your boss, you know, looked at that stuff, you know, later in your life? I mean, and I'm sure there's plenty of stuff a lot worse than just people partying, you know, and getting drunk and putting videos of it on the internet.
Well, just because you're partying doesn't necessarily mean that you're getting drunk.
Right. I'm saying, okay. Anyways, you know, stuff where it's like you wouldn't want to show your employer that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, stuff you wouldn't want to write home mom about.
Yeah. Yeah, like I've seen some people post stuff on social media. It's like, you know, their parents have Facebook, and I'm thinking about this as I'm watching this. Like, their parents have Instagram. You know, why are they putting this up?
Well, you know, it's funny you should say that because when I first came across not the social media, but the phones, these smartphones, I was in Iraq, and I was watching a wingman. She had this phone, and it was like it had everything on it. And I thought, man, that is like the most coolest thing. If I had that when I was a kid, I would have been rich, because you know you can trade wherever you want. I mean, you have everything right there. You have it all in the palm of your hand, and I thought that was the coolest thing. And then I think things like Skype, which is not necessarily a social media, but I think that has actually saved many marriages for those families that do live overseas, where their husbands or their wives are in combat, and they have to leave their family at home, because to try to get to use a payphone or something like that just to talk to your wife once in a while, and you're standing in a large line back in, like it was, you know, in World War II and in Vietnam, even, I mean, more recent ones. So, I think there's a lot of benefit there. And when I was overseas and I started, my wife was talking about getting on Facebook or adding to these accounts and stuff like that, just so that she could see what her sons and daughters are doing, so that way she could keep tabs on them, if you will, so that she could see what they're up to. And I thought, oh, that's a pretty good idea. Yeah, I think I'll do that too. Yeah, so that's kind of how I got a little bit more into it. But I think it's grown a little bit more for me from there, both on a personal level and on a business level.
Well, you know, Daniel, you mentioned people posting stuff on Facebook that their parents can see. You know, to play devil's advocate, why shouldn't they want their parents to see it?
Well, I mean, I'm just saying, I know a lot of people, it's like, they wouldn't, I don't know, maybe I misjudged them. You know, it's good to have an open line of communication. And you know, for a good relationship, you have to have an open line of communication with your parents. I'm just saying, because I know a lot of these people, it's like, they wouldn't tell their parents about that normally. Why, you know, why are they putting it on social media? It's like they don't realize, I don't know, maybe they're not thinking, is the thought that's crossed my mind.
Well, I think I remember a little bit about being a teenager, an adolescent teenager, an old, even younger 20 adolescent, if you will, and realizing that there's a little bit of, in fact, there's a lot of bit of pride saying that you're able to party hard or whatever else like that, and you know, there's a little bit of bragging rights there. Seemingly, there really isn't, and that's what I think some of these postings are over, because it's like, aha, I've done this, and so on and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
And
another thing to go to the parental level is maybe the child is thinking that if they post it on social media, that the parent will have time to think it through more thoroughly, to where they're not and they avoid some bit of confrontation with that, which I think is another thing that social media and unfortunately technology in general has allowed people to do is avoid confrontation, whether it be a parent to a child or whether it be in a relationship, that you just text about it.
I would say for me at least, it's done the opposite. It's amplified confrontation. I mean, now usually when I see something provoking, I'll just try and delete it from my feed, or I'll just ignore it. But there have been times in the past where I've seen people I know, people I like, will post something and I have an objection to it. It's like, that's not correct. I don't think that's true, or I think that's a horrible thing of them for them to say. And then, I'll leave a comment and I'll ask a question, and then before you know it, there's 7 paragraphs of defense and offense for me asking that question or me posing a point or whatever. And then, the comment section is just flooded from all types of people, and there's this big, hot argument.
But that's not happening on a personal level. There's a very big difference between if the three of us were to be getting into an argument right now, as opposed to if the three of us go home and have an argument over text. There's a lot more time to think back and forth before you say something, and there's also the emotional side of it, where if you're in an argument and you're getting angry, you can't necessarily portray that in a text. That's what I mean by the avoiding confrontation.
I've seen people try.
All capital letters and exclamation points.
Well, I think there's some short-sightedness, and a lot of people have lost the aspect of what's appropriate, what should actually be good for people, good for the soul, good for your fellow man or woman or whatever. And I think there's a lot of short-sightedness in the whole posting and the social media thing, and that's probably what more or less causes a lot of bad feelings. Like I said earlier, mentioned earlier, with respect to people even committing suicide over something that was posted against them on some social media, and that's sad.
Yes, very.
So whether they've taken it wrong or it's just an outright lashing out against the other person, some things should not be posted, and the influences and the consequences of those things do have some damning effects, and more so now in the younger generation than what it has been in the past.
Most definitely. I mean, even in a high school setting, there's an interesting way people portray themselves on social media as opposed to how they act in person. I met several people in person after I had met them on social media, which was a very interesting experience, meeting someone on social media first. Because they try to portray themselves and put forward a certain persona, and then you meet them in person.
I was expecting Tom Selleck.
Right, right. You're expecting someone who's, if they're getting in contact with you first and they're contributing a lot to a conversation, you're expecting someone who's fairly extroverted and
right. Or I should have said Tom Cruise.
But and then you wind up meeting the person, and in one case I had to go up to the person and introduce myself because they were incredibly introverted, and it was a very I'll say shocking experience to have that. You're meeting two different people, and
two books,
it was
both with the same title.
Right. It was hard. It was it was confusing for me because I wasn't sure. Okay, which is the real person here, and which is just the persona that they're trying to put forward.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely, when I was younger, particularly, I spent a lot of time texting, and I spent a lot of time on social media, and there was a lot of stuff I said to a lot of people that I never, ever, ever, ever would have said face to face, and there are a lot of conversations that I had over text or social media intentionally because I knew I wasn't courageous enough to say a lot of this stuff in person to people. So, and I'm sure a lot of people had that opinion of me, that same opinion you just described, that same appearance. I'm sure I had that same appearance to a lot of people,
Yeah, I can see what you're saying, and in a lot of ways, I'm probably polar opposite of that, where I'll say a lot more to your face than I would shouting it out on top of the rooftops on a social media post.
Yeah, I've changed a lot. Like I've had, I'm not super experienced at the whole life thing, but I've had enough experiences to teach me, like, you don't talk about important stuff over a text message. Like, if there is clarification or any sort of debate that needs to happen, you know what I mean? Or anything really pertinent and important, you don't share it over a text. It's one thing to, like, say you appreciate someone or whatever. Maybe there's a thought, maybe there's a good time to put it in a text if you know that there's no way you're going to get through it in an actual conversation with this person. So you write a note or you write a text and you give them the note or whatever. Sometimes, but if you actually, if it's important to talk about, no, don't. It's not texting material.
Now, what if someone is actively trying to talk about it through text and you want to save it? And because I've been in that situation, I've been in the situation where I've even said to someone, I think this needs to be a conversation held in person because of how important it was, and the conversation never happened, and I haven't been in contact with that person since. And anyway, it was almost like they didn't want to talk about it in person. They just wanted to be able to say what they wanted to say and then drop it.
Yeah, exactly what you just said. I mean, if somebody wants to express, I'll say feel free to express yourself over text. But if somebody says, I want to talk about such and such, that's exactly what I tell them. We're talking about it. Or, we're not doing this. Yeah, no, at the very least, a phone call. A phone call is infinitely better than a text. Better than a text, and when you got to talk about something important, or you need closure. Because if they're not able to talk about it to your face, if they're not able to tell it to you, if you're not able to communicate, then there's an issue in the relationship. You know what I mean? Is my opinion.
It's a good opinion. Yeah, I think people should learn how to communicate and communicate effectively.
I agree that there is an issue there, though I don't know that it's in the relationship. It could be. There's definitely the potential for it to be in the relationship has a problem, but it could just be one side has the issue that they don't excel at communicating their ideas to other people.
Well, I think in today's day and age, everybody is an expert. All they have to do is turn on the Oracle, aka Google, and find out what they want to find out, and all of a sudden, bada boom, bada bing, they got it. They know it,
and
that's their opinion.
With the abundance of knowledge that Google has, you can find out just about anything that is parallel with your opinion.
Everybody's an expert now.
Exactly.
Just ask them. They know, and they've already formed their opinions. And that's, I think, is in some ways detrimental to the populace in general, and also very much it has a bad, it can and it does have a very bad influence over society, because since we are talking about social media, this is a social matter, and the influences of it, of what that happened, how that affects our society, the influences of it. I think it is. I think it's very important. Very important, and a major influence over everybody's lives here.
Mm-hmm. Well, I agree. So, moving forward, then, you mentioned social media having such a big effect on society, having a big effect on all of us. What effect is entertainment having on us? Entertainment's something that's been around for generations upon generations. And specifically in entertainment, we're talking about celebrities, people of high social status, music, public figures, politicians, TV shows.
Yeah, I mean, you've seen a lot of people come to light and die, over your period, I'm sure. And you've probably witnessed, how much the entertainment has changed, and if I could use the word evolved, I don't know, at least changed into something different. Because I think it has. You go and you watch movies from the 50s and 60s, and most of them aren't like movies nowadays.
Yeah. Even though I wasn't around in the 50s.
Right, but that's a lot of the movies you had growing up.
Yeah. A lot of my entertainment was either contemporary at the time or earlier, obviously. So being aware of what was coming through the boob tube and over the radio when I was in my more formidable years, the early 70s on up, those really did have a very lasting and very powerful impact. I mean, Abbott and Costello were my heroes.
Mine too.
Yeah. Bugs Bunny, I thought was a pretty cool guy. Rabbit, anyway. Those are my major influences, as well as Captain Kangaroo. Really like Captain, and when I heard him back in the when he had passed away, I felt very bad, because I always liked Captain Kangaroo. I mean, even after I got older, I knew I didn't watch him anymore, but I could see what good he was doing, and I heard about some of the good things that he had done. So the celebrities these days that we see in the entertainment does not quite have the same lasting effect with me, because of a lot of the what I would call garbage and trash that is put forth and across as being entertainment.
Mm-hmm. I agree with that, and I think a big reason for me why I don't necessarily agree with or relate to many of the modern day celebrities is, well, this may be a building block on what you said of the garbage and trash that's put forward, but I feel that many of them are very shallow people. They're not characterized by good principles. Like many of them are living on a whim, constantly doing impulsive things, especially within the past 5 years with the amount of rise in the popularity of rap music and how prevalent that culture has become. It's terrible to see so many people subscribing to these people and to be looking up to them as role models, when really what they're looking up to is living impulsively and just living for money and fame and superficial goals.
Well, I I would say a lot of the entertainment area has always attracted and had great influencers of people of nefarious ends. What they actually wanted out of it. And usually, it's some form of a fame or popularity or what have you. That is the realm of which attracts, and people with those intentions gravitate to. If you look at the movie stars going back to the time of the silent movies on up, I mean, there's always been people in there that had multiple spouses. One divorce after another divorce after another divorce, and that's very common today. And if you look at these people as being influences of a in the public eye, and they see that it's okay, this person gets divorced and gets remarried, divorced and remarried, and so on and so forth. That does have an influence on those people that looked at those as being a celebrity or a star.
Yeah, I mean, we talk about movies and TV having a negative influence. I mean, I'd say those, prior to when I was old enough to independently go out and be my own person without anyone watching, movies were my biggest negative influence, outside of whatever influences I were self-generated as far as outside. Yeah. I mean, I remember growing up, and when I was, not all movies, definitely not all movies, but I remember a few movies in particular that still to this day I cannot get out of my mind. The exposure they opened me up to, things I would never have thought about. This disgusting fantasy or whatever that's portrayed in a movie, highly inappropriate. And I mean, I was young and susceptible, and it catches your attention, and
it's long lasting.
Yeah, and it sticks in there, and
hopefully it was one of the yellow. It was not one of the yellow colored movies. Well, the reason why I say that is Daniel well knows is we had a VCR that recorded VCRs, and his mom and I had watched the movies, and we would code them with colors so that they weren't allowed to see any of the movies that we recorded that had. That was either yellow or red, and but they were allowed the green and the blue, green and pink.
Pink, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Pink was the safest one.
Yeah. Okay. I don't know. Maybe because that was the girls. There's a lot of Barbie, not even Barbie movies. Probably more like Barney movies. But that's why I say that, because I was very when I was 13, 14 years old, somewhere in there. My dad and my mom came home one night. I think it was a Friday night, and maybe it was even a Thursday. It doesn't matter. But my younger brother Nathan and my older sister Dawn were in the watching television. I think it was even a Simon and Simon. I can't remember what movie it was, or a regular program that came on every week. And we're about halfway through it, and I could hear my mom and dad come into the front door. I hear my dad walking across over into the kitchen. I heard one of the drawers open up, and then I heard his steps getting closer and closer to us. And then he come up from behind us, stepped behind the television, unplugged it, and cut the cord. And that was the last time we had television in the house. And he just said, "There's so much junk that comes into that television that we don't need it." And Nathan got upset, and Dawn was upset because they were watching this movie. They were watching this episode, and they were into it. And so he just said, that's that, and period. And he looked at me, and he says, "What do you got to say about it?" And I stood up, and I told him, I was wondering when you're going to do that. Because I recognized, even at being 12, 13, that what was coming through the television was a waste of time. And not only is it just a waste of time, it also detracts from your moral compass. It definitely sends it in the wrong direction.
Oh yes.
Most everything it does just that. I mean, look at Teletubbies. You would think that Teletubbies was something that was for kids. but it's not. It sends a completely different message.
Right. I mean,
it's not Captain Kangaroo. I'll tell you that.
yeah. I mean, the agendas they try and push for. It's, they try and push for some weird, sick, twisted stuff, and they weave it in, and for you to accept it as like something normal and fine and good. Yeah. I mean, and
well, even if there wasn't an angle, if you have no angle at all, the fact that there's an absence that is not being taught, that should be being taught and being spoken about, and that has been replaced by either the opposite or nothing at all. And I'm talking about Jesus Christ and anything that is good and holy. They're not; those things are not spoken about. In fact, they're just omitted. And if they're not omitted, they're directly either the opposite is brought forward, or they're constantly slamming it. Mm-hmm. And that's the portrayal of the influence that you get almost 24/7, 99.99% of the time.
Right. And what you both mentioned about it detracting from your moral compass and it trying to put forward something that isn't true or is a detriment. There's a lecture I was listening to this past week by Jordan Peterson where he does a lot of analysis on the older Disney movies, and he's stated that the reason he's so attracted to them is that they tell mythological stories, and they usually have some archetype behind them that they're portraying, and even at very young ages that we understand what they're portraying. We may not be able to articulate what we are understanding, but we know why. Somewhere deep down we know why. And he started doing some analysis on the newer Disney movies, in particular Frozen, and he was talking about how he does not like that movie at all because there is no mythological story behind it. There's no timeless truth that it's teaching. His argument is that it's trying to force an ideology on people.
Well, it definitely could be. I don't know if the last Frozen movie, I never watched that one. I did watch the first one. And the early Disney movies, they always seem to have a story about one of the characters' parents being dead, of not existing. I mean, if not both of them. I mean, almost every single one. Bambi, what happens to his mom? She gets turned into dinner. Snow White, her mom and dad are both out of the picture. Cinderella, right. First her mom, then her dad. And these parents always seem to be being offed or disappearing, so there's a disruption.
Or they're less than ideal parents,
right?
In the case of Sleeping Beauty.
I understand that without conflict, there's not much of a storyline. I realize that you have to have action, you have to have some purpose in there, and it seems to be that Disney always picked that, and the fact that Frozen pretty much started off with that right after the first couple scenes where their mom and dad died on a ship somewhere. So now the children are left to make their own decisions without any good moral upbringing, where they're in charge of everybody else. So yeah, we don't have any guidance here, but we're going to rule this country here.
Right. It is interesting, kind of going down that rabbit hole a little bit, how the older sister, if I'm remembering correctly, the older sister wants to continue ruling the same way that her parents were and keeping the kingdom closed off. And the younger sister doesn't understand why, and she's trying to open up the gates, if you will. And that's interesting how that almost portrays two opposing political views of wanting to keep things the way they are or go back to the older ways and stay secluded as opposed to trying to bring new people in and constantly.
Well, there's the underlining thing here that you haven't talked about is the fact that the ruler of the country has this power that nobody else has. It's a very deadly, very
where they can
strong.
freeze everything. They can stop everything whenever they want.
Yeah. It's there's more being said in that story that than just just something, a tale to tell.
Right.
There is no Aesop's table in this. Aesop's fable. There's not. You're not getting much gratuitous and helpful information from this. This is truly something that is more entertaining, and unfortunately, it doesn't have the same effects because it doesn't influence the same as what it used to. There is no moral to the story. There is no, like Jordan Peterson stated, there is what's the sense of it? When
Right.
you have these entertainments being brought to you, and they influence everybody's lives, and Daniel is no exception because he still has he must have watched one of the Yellow movies. But to separate fantasy from fiction, and that is one thing that I personally realize, that when there's the entertainment that comes out, and if it's in a movie or a TV or whatever broadcasting program, I realize that it's all set. It's all make believe. I mean, there's actors and actresses and a director and so on and so forth, and they're trying to entertain. They're trying to put across whatever messages they are. And I don't know what other people necessarily look at it as being. I would hope that they would look at it in the same light, that it's entertainment, and whether there is an underlining tone or a message that they're trying to get across.
Well, that's what stories are in general. Is they're portraying some message. There's always some. That's where the term "the moral of the story" comes from. There's for something to be a good story, a lasting story, it's
He's got to teach something.
Yeah,
exactly.
it teaches something of good consequence.
Correct.
Now, on the opposite side of that, the influence that I find more appealing and more troubling to society as a whole is the influence of music, where there isn't really so much as a separation of, well, this is just an actor, or there's directors and actresses and a plot and so on and so forth. Because music is the commercial music that's being put across now is usually 3 minutes and 15 seconds at the most. That's typically where it is, and so they have a short amount of time to get whatever information that they want, and it usually appeals to we talked about the passions last time, and not the good kind of passions. They're usually appealing to the very morbid passions.
Yes, the impulses and the vices.
Right. And since this goes by so fast, and there's so many different genres that talk about pretty much the same things.
They use different words, but it's all the same. When you break it down, it's all the same fundamental that they're trying to push.
You try to tell a young kid that has been listening to rock and roll music or some other very influential music, whether it's rap or pop. You try to tell them that their music is evil and influential, you will see somebody that will defend it to their death.
Oh yes, it's a very interesting thing talking with someone about their music.
And you won't find the same effects, or you won't find the same response to somebody if you talk about a movie.
No,
it seems very.
The interesting thing is you don't even have to say that your music is evil and it's having a bad influence. You can just say, I don't like it. it's not for me, and immediately they want to know why. They want to know
They want to defend it.
exactly.
Yeah.
That's what they identify with.
Yeah,
It's
well, that-
part of them.
And that's one of the things I was studying when I was when I was taking up music in college was the psychology of music, because there is an art in there, if you will.
thing that surprised me is, well, for one thing, you don't ever really, I believe, you don't ever really know someone. Like, there's stuff that goes on in the deep recesses of people's minds that never really gets surfaced, but I think music shows a lot that you don't see normally. The type of music people listen to. I've met plenty of very mild, kind, polite people. Plenty. Like, so many examples. Everybody who's listening, I'm sure, has met someone like this, whether they know it or not. You know, they're very mild, very kind, very polite, and then, you know, you go for a drive with them in their car, and they're listening to music that's talking about rape, drugs, stealing, being angry, murder, big one, and, you know, they're jamming out to it. It's like, wow. And there's a lot of music out there like that, and like, I'm sure a lot of people don't dig too deep into the lyrics, but if they know the lyrics, I mean, the lyrics have had an
They
influence.
sing along.
Yeah, if they say, yeah,
It's a very powerful instrument.
right. Like, I know people that, like, they're not the type of people to go around cursing or anything, but they'll curse if they're singing lyrics to a song all day, you know.
Yeah, you mentioned, you know, people singing along to stuff and cursing when they normally wouldn't. You know, I've been in the car with someone who's done just that, and I never thought to ask him about it. But that's a very interesting point that you bring up, and one thing I'd like to add to it is if you've ever been in that situation, and have you found yourself doing the same thing, like when someone else turns on music, just going along with it?
Yeah. Oh, definitely. Especially like parties. I'm not proud to say it, like, but yeah.
Well, neither am I, and I've done it, but it's happened, and that's why I felt the need to bring it up. And as well, you mentioned parties and stuff, like.
I'm laughing, so I apologize.
It's an interesting culture that happens at a party, because you have everyone drinking and intoxicated and all that stuff, and they're just blaring music too. And it's you can't think, your mind does not function in that scenario. Like, if you are in there, even if you aren't intoxicated, there's no way you can try to, at least for me, there's no way I can have some clear sense of what I'm thinking about when there's constantly this music being blared into your ears, especially when it's talking about stuff like killing people or committing a crime of any sort. And I was a few months back, I was talking with one friend, and we were having a fairly deep conversation, and as soon as I felt like I was starting to get through the surface of what she was talking about, and maybe start to help her figure out a problem, a solution to a problem that she was having at work, she immediately wanted to turn music on. And I thought it was a very interesting thing that she wanted to turn music on. And when I asked her not to, because I was trying to think, she was taken aback by that and wasn't sure how to react, that I couldn't think as clearly when I was listening to music. And I went into detail on how I was, whenever
men
I
definitely
listen.
think different than guys or girls, that's for sure.
Right.
But,
And that may have been some of it, but just in general, I've always felt like if I'm listening to music with lyrics, it's very hard to concentrate on something.
Mhm. Yeah. Unlike something like, say, from Mozart or Beethoven, Bach, so on and so forth, that
Correct. I mean, any type of classical music is very, at least to me, is very calming and very soothing and helps me have clarity of thought.
well, we use the term music pretty loosely here.
Yes.
The true definition of music does not have the same connotations as what it was originally.
See, I've heard the argument that the definition of music is lyrics sung to a tune or lyrics sung to a beat. And what is your definition of music?
Well, there's music, and then what we have are songs. All right, that's a lot of the things that we have nowadays. We consider songs, but everyone says, "Well, this is your music. This is your genre, or whatever." But to really bring it back to a very fundamental source, true music is art. And it is one of the major arts, like painting and sculpture. Music is also in that same liberal arts area of learning. For something to be an art, it has to truly be an art. It needs to reflect God or divinity or other things of good. This is,
or at least something transcendent.
Or, yeah, some truth, some principle. It's got to have some meaningful value.
And I mean, if we had phone lines open right now and people were listening to us live, it would be going off the. Every single line would be beeping, because there would be so many people that would probably refute what I'm saying with respect to something of being art.
Oh yeah,
most definitely.
I mean, look at colleges nowadays.
And the stuff that they're trying to put out as art, I wouldn't necessarily put it in the same category as the traditional meaning and foundation of art.
Most people would say that's your opinion, though.
Well, of course they would, because they don't know the difference between opinion and fact and truth. So they consider their feelings to be their truth, because a lot of people believe that how they perceive is their reality.
Yeah, I've heard that many times. Perception is reality. Not to go off on too much of a tangent, but okay, there's truth, and there are certain principles that exist in the reality that don't care about your opinion. But I do understand and agree that perception is reality insofar as what you see is something real, even if it's within the confines of your mind. That your reality isn't the proper word for it because it's not real, but it is real in the sense that you created it.
Like a dream.
Yeah, I mean, but the thing, like, okay, you can't change basic principles just by thinking them up or having the fantasy. But as far as you're concerned as an individual, your perception is your reality, and that is reality. And in a sense, it is real. I mean, when you're trying to communicate somebody and convince somebody of something, you cannot disregard their perspective. You know, if you try and...
Well, I'm not disregarding their perspective. What I'm trying to get across is definition, and I've said this last time, is the lack of proper communication and a good influence is based on people's what they feel to be understood as something that is defined, where this is defined, this is part of their life, and this is how we have attached these feelings to these ideals or ideas. And so in defining music, we know that it comes under an art, and we know that art is a reflection of God. And it usually also has other good connotations attributed to the art. Music is supposed to fall under that same thing, and if it fails to do that, it can no longer be considered music anymore. If it fails to meet the litmus test of what an art is. right? So anything like a song that talks about rape or killing cops or calling up the demons of hell and the abyss, this is not music. This is a song that represents something else other than what real music is. And unfortunately, the commercial side of our society has definitely played into that. And because of human nature being soiled as it is, it can make a lot of money selling this garbage, this junk, and whether that is in music or television, or the other entertainment. I mean, they are amusements, and they do detract from good influences. Even neutral influences would be better than bad influences.
No, definitely, I would agree with that.
Certainly, and you make a very valid point. So the last of our 3 topics we're hoping to get to in this episode, the public school systems. What influence are these having on the current generations? And to go along with the other questions that we've asked in a little while ago, how different is the public school system affecting society now as opposed to how it affected the societies back when you were young, Mr. Check? Because I went to public school for the last 2 years of my high school, and it was a very interesting experience for me, especially coming from a homeschool setting.
Yeah, I imagine.
Very much so.
And how, what influences did the public education have on you in your last 2 years?
So in the last 2 years of my high school, it had as I said, a very interesting effect. So as far as socially, I feel that it did make me more well socialized, and I think that was a benefit of me going to public school, that I was able to become more of an extrovert. I would classify myself as an introvert, but I was able to adopt some of the characteristics of an extrovert through being around so many people. It did force me in a way to do that, which, as I said, I think is a benefit. But as well, there's a lot of negatives that came along with that. I mean, I was exposed to a culture that I would argue glorified impulsive behavior, definitely glorified what I call keeping up with the modern day keeping up with the Joneses. And by that I mean going into debt to go to college and moving out when you go to college, not living within your means and worrying about that later on. Another thing that I didn't know it affected me at the time, and I hadn't known this till, I'd say, within the past 6 months, is when I was in history classes, I didn't realize how much of history was left out in the public school system. Mainly some of the things that happened in the 20th century, like, for instance, in Soviet Russia, the communist takeover, and really how that happened. It was a small, minuscule part of the course, and even that part, it was like a gloss over of it. It wasn't going into detail. I don't even think that the Soviet gulags were even mentioned. If they were, it was a very small part. And that's something that cannot be overlooked, something that's arguably one of the biggest events that happened in the 20th century. And I wasn't taught about it, and like the only reason I know is because I've heard about it and then started reading about it.
I see. And that was what you heard about when you heard about it and you started reading about it. Was that during that time that you're in public education?
No, that was within the past 6 months that I've...
Oh, really? Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Well, that is interesting, and I do have something to say with respect to public school and the influences. Um, the Here's an interesting fact. My mother's maiden name is Dewey. Um, if anybody out there happens to know what the Dewey Decimal System is, that is a distant relative of mine, John Dewey. And I believe he was also, if not, he was a very, very close relative to another very famous Dewey. If it was the same John Dewey, I don't remember, because not all my knowledge, my history, even in my own family tree, is that great. But there was another Dewey who I am somewhat related to.
Is his name Huey or Louis?
No, it was definitely Dewey. He actually was very much intrigued with, speaking of Russia, Pavlov's dogs. And if you're familiar with the psychological study of ringing a bell and giving the dog food, ringing a bell, giving the dog food, this Russian scientist and Dewey got together and they compared notes, and Pavlov went back and brought Dewey's education system back to Russia, and I believe, from what I understand and remember on it, is that it was going to be implemented, or starting to be implemented, in Russia, but whether it was Stalin or Lenin who said, put a kibosh to it very quickly and said, no, we are not going to be raising idiots in our country. More or less, that's pretty much the stop of that education system that Dewey had actually implemented in our public school system. It's an out-based education. It does not formulate the same narratives that bring forth a good influence and the best influence in our society today. And that's probably one of the main characteristics. And if I would say, if there was an overall arching main influence in our society that actually fosters bad influences, it can be found through the guise of being educated publicly.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not super up and up about the history of the education system. I know some. I've read some books. I remember reading one particular book in particular that goes back. Can't even remember the lady's name, but she became a communist and became a big communist member, trained through universities and started a club, which apparently is pretty common to do, is start a communist club at a university and make communist plans. Anyways, and she ended up changing her life, and I think she became a Catholic, or I'm not sure, maybe she became a Christian. I don't know, but I can definitely recognize the issues, even if I can't tell you 100% the history or the causes, because I was homeschooled, right, by your wife, my mother,
for a few years.
Yeah, until I was in second grade. Through second grade, right? When I was in third grade, I went to private school, which, in my opinion, it's the only private grade school I've gone to, but the best school I could possibly ever have asked for. Not perfect, but a very good school, Immaculate Conception Academy. But I grew up, and by the time I was getting into junior, senior year, getting my driver's license, I got to meet a lot of people not in private school, and I got to meet a lot, and then I graduated, and then I went to college, and I got to see what all the other people fresh out of public high school look like. And I will tell you,
what does the rest of the world look like?
Right. Well, I'll tell you what, I think the biggest shocker to me, The biggest shocker to me.
Sorry, Dad.
No,
This
no.
is not a laughing matter.
No,
but
no, no. Yeah. Ooh, other people. Wow, they got.
What do they look like?
They're aliens. They're big apes. Anyway, but no, the biggest shocker was like, man, these people have no shame. They have no shame. I looked at a very small sample size, of individuals in the private school, very unique. It's not like that's a.
And you were looking at the conservative side that was going to the engineering portion of the college,
Yeah.
right? Right. We're not talking liberal arts here.
Right. I mean, but even when I started to meet, public school dropouts or even high school graduates from public school systems, it's like, man, these people have no shame. Like, and I felt like, you don't get this, like in seeing people's money spending habits, how they, maybe I was just looking at the wrong sample of people, because there are plenty of people, fantastic people that have gone to public school. So I can't say like, oh, public school, but that was the biggest difference, is like, these people have no shame. And like the way they dress, the way they talk, the way they don't show up to class, the way they
Right.
they curse. It's like in front of their peers, in front of teachers, and all this other stuff. It's like they're, maybe my schooling was just extremely higher standards, or at least I feel like higher standards, or just like
No, there were standards.
very low,
There were
low to no
standards.
standards in public
and
education.
I went K through 12 at a public education. K through 12 in the same public school. Population 201. Salute. That's right. Buckley, Michigan, my hometown. No, public education, like I said before, is probably the underlying factor that causes, that is most detriment to our society, because of the fact of what has been going on. And if you look at the definitions and the definitions of words, a democracy back at the turn of the previous century, back in the 1900s, back when my granddad was born, democracy was defined as a transitionary form of government that was usually from a free society, aka capitalist society, to a communist society. Democracy has always, that's the way it had been defined. Throughout the years, you'll find that democracy has been redefined and publicly educated in those new definitions. It has been a progressive form of dumbing down the society. And if you just look at the definitions of words that they, in the entertainment and everything else, and the things that they stop teaching, that now they teach, or they don't teach anymore, or the things that they're leaving out, and not to mention the things that they are teaching that are incorrect, it has been a progressive instillment. Education is most important, and it is the duty of the parents to make sure that your children have the best form of influence in their education. Not society, not the federal government.
I agree with that. And
Wait, no, doesn't it take a village to raise a child?
Not where I come from, not in my country.
so, building on that, actually, one thing that one trend that I noticed while I was in public school was how normally teachers don't, at least in my experience, normally teachers wouldn't express their opinion, especially if it was on politics. It was normally kept to themselves, or at least that's the way I thought it should have been. And I won't say which side, but one side seemed to have no problem expressing their opinions on matters, and the other side was, I don't know if it was their own choice that they were hush-hush about it, or whether they were told, you can't say those things. We're not going to allow you to say those things while you're working for us here.
Right? Yeah. You can be pro-communist, but you can't talk about true conservatism.
Yes, that was what I was getting at, was that, and there was a very common theme, was that many of the more liberal teachers and the left-leaning, very far left-leaning teachers would have no problem talking about this and trying to push that ideology on students. And the high school that I went to was a fairly conservative-leaning high school as far as the students went. And so normally there would be I don't know if you can call it a debate. It'd be more like an argument between the class and the teachers. I remember at one point this was in a science class of all places. The teacher decided we were going to have a debate on whether the schools should be allowed to arm their teachers. And the students overwhelmingly agreed with this. And the teacher said, well, if that was going to be mandated, I would be quitting my job. And it was interesting that he refused to accept that
the responsibility. Yeah, and it's more of a responsibility to teach than it is to go out and shoot somebody that wants to come in and shoot your children. Right. There's a higher responsibility in teaching the children correctly and good things. There's more responsibility in that than there is in actually arming yourself on an intruder that happens to come into your classroom.
But the thing was that it wasn't like he was anti-violence or anything. Like, right. He had talked about the quote-unquote process, if you will, if there was to be a school shooting, that they were teaching this thing, I believe it was called Run, Hide, Fight. And so he would periodically, we would have drills, and he would go through, okay, like, if someone was to break in here into our classroom, you'd grab a chair or a desk or a book, and you throw it at him or hit him with it or something. So it's not like he was against the violence against the shooter. It was just the matter of the gun.
Oh, I see.
It was all based in
a nasty piece of steel. Oh. Well, yeah, that's we can see where he was influenced. I mentioned democracy earlier, and I'm not being political here. I'm not.
We've been trying to keep this out, but it does tend to seep into our arguments.
I am not talking Democrats and Republicans. I'm talking about forms of government. And when I was bringing this up, a democracy is a transitory. It doesn't last. It's a very short distance. I mean, if you want to look at democracy, mob, aka mob rules, look at what happened when Jesus was brought before Caiaphas. All right, it was crucify him. Actually, before Pontius Pilate, when the mob rule, Jews said, let's crucify him. That was mob rules. That was democracy. And the guy was pressured into giving in to what they wanted because he was afraid for himself back in Rome that the Caesar.
But he denied accountability for it.
That's right. He washed his hands of it, but yet he still said, okay, go ahead. But that is a form of democracy. Right or wrong, that is a form of democracy. What we live in this country is a republic. It is based upon laws. And that is a defining definition, a defining line between anarchy and a non-anarchy of what we have. When we're talking about the major influences right now, the whole thing of this part of it is social influences, and there is a huge outreach, lashing out, and issues with respect to all these organizations that want a new order, a new country, if you will. If they get rid of the laws and allow mob rule to exist, there will be a form of democracy that will go into a form of another type of an economy, which is called communism.
Right. I mean, like the idea of democracy is not new at all, and like you said, you can't find any sustained democracy throughout history. You go all the way back to ancient Greece, BC, ancient Greece. The Greeks were like, we're gonna create a democracy, and they couldn't do it.
Time and time
They
again,
it
it has always fallen. It's always fallen.
Right. I mean, the closest thing, sustainable thing the Greeks could get to a democracy, and this was with trying, very smart people in Greece, much of who we get our education from, classically speaking, today, couldn't develop the closest thing they came up with was a republic. That's what it was, with a hierarchy of authority.
But going along with that, it's not like a republic is this great thing that we've come up with. That capitalism is just the best.
I prefer to use the word free markets instead of capitalism because
even
the
free
connotation.
markets, it's not like it's the
You want to call it capitalism? I would call it free markets.
right, but it's not like it's this great thing where everyone is prosperous. But when you compare it to something else, that's where you see, well, it's not great, but it's better than what could be. Like it's better than socialism. It's better than communism.
What, democracy?
No,
Or
free market. A free market.
Free market, yeah. Well, it's infinite. It's infinitely better because it comes down to possession. One of the things that it comes is down to possession. Whether you're allowed to own something and I'm not. And a true socialism or true communism belongs to the state. It doesn't belong to you. It belongs to everybody else in here. You don't have any personal freedom. You don't have any personal rights to private property.
Exactly. And in going along that same thing, this podcast is not Daniel and my podcast. It's your podcast. It's everyone in the state of Ohio's podcast. It's everyone's podcast. So what gives us the right to have our access to, to publishing it? Everyone should be able to.
Probably everybody could if they lived under a free society.
Yeah.
Under a free market. That's something you would not be able to do under a mob rule or socialism or communism. I've lived in a communist country for a couple years. I know the effects of what it does to people. Mm-hmm. And it is a very damning effect, and it's very unhealthy. It's bad influence.
I would imagine people in communist society, imagine and take from what I've learned from history books, you create a society where people won't talk and they will not disclose their opinion and they won't right they can't tell people what they actually think. Anyone, they cannot portray any idea that goes against what's pushed as being acceptable. They can't bring it to the light, otherwise they'll be persecuted and
thrown in prison. And has existed for the past thousands of years.
I guess the best form of government that all of us owe our allegiance to is a monarchy, where we have a king and a queen. Our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ is our king, and his mother is a queen that we all owe our allegiance to, and that is the best form of government.
That king does have parts.
It has three parts.
Yes.
I was talking specifically about not the Holy Family, those two, our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. I'm not saying that he is any greater or any lesser than God the Father and God the Holy Ghost.
Right.
But he has even said, and I'm paraphrasing here, that his Father has given him dominion over all these things. And that is a true allegiance that everybody, every soul that was ever created will and owes their allegiance to our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ and his blessed mother, the true queen of heaven and earth.
Couldn't have said it better. I think that's a great note to end on. So in this episode, we talked about, firstly, social media and how it's brought some big changes in our culture, especially in the younger generations, that it's had many detriments to our culture, and that it's made it very easy to affect people with no accountability for your actions. We've talked about how there's some positive effects of social media, such as it being good for businesses and networking, but also that people can get sucked into social media and live in that world, that it can lead to people putting forward a persona that isn't really theirs, and then not being able to live up to that. And a quote here from Mr. Sheck is that social media is a dangerous trap if not used correctly. Another thing that we glossed over briefly was technology and how far it's come in the past 100 years, especially in saving relationships like marriages for soldiers who are overseas. We talked about entertainment. We talked about how celebrities can influence people, especially in movies, and how movies portray certain stories, and we are acting out these stories, and how it, especially many contemporary movies, are used as influences to expose you to inappropriate things, and how they can detract very much from your moral compass. We talked about music and how it, in today's society, is used to affect us in a way that causes us to think very perversely and can lead us to acting impulsively. It's used to help us identify with who we are, and that it has very, very long-lasting psychological effects. We defined very in depth the difference between music and a song, music being an art that portrays something divine and something good, and songs that are merely about things that are superficial, such as impulses and crimes and such. And lastly, we talked about public school systems and the different positive and negative effects that can be attributed to it, especially the positive effects of social interaction, that it does in some way counteract what social media does, but also that it can cause this, it can have the same effect of social media, or even multiply the effects of social media. That also, another negative effect being that history is not taught very well, that it's been picked off, different parts of history have been picked off as not needing to be taught at all. We talked about some of the history of public schools, and especially the history of public schools in Russia and how government is taken over in that system. We talked about some of the differences between a republic and a democracy and how the definitions have changed and have been reflected in public schools and in the teaching of public schools. And we talked about how different opinions can be shared by certain people and not by others in public schools, and how that's affecting the current generations very, very adversely. And lastly, we talked about some of the different ideologies that are being forced on students in public schools. And then we talked about how our true allegiance is to the monarchy of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ and His Blessed Mother. And I would like to personally thank Mr. Michael Scheck for being in this part 2 of Influence.
Well, thank you for inviting me back, Phil.
Well, you're very
Daniel.
welcome.
Yep, thank you, Dad. It's a big step for us, and I'm sure we will be able to apply much of what we learned to our next guest on the show. So we thank you for learning with us and, going through the process. As you could probably tell, this is new, and we got plenty of stuff to work through, but it was a good experience to learn from. Oh, yes, definitely. Well, thank you all for joining us today on this episode. Maybe we got something wrong. We want to hear what you guys think. We're open to suggestions for any ideas you might have. Any thoughts you might have about this video or ideas for future topics. You can reach us by our email, which is attherootofknowledge@gmail.com. We also now have social media pages. We have an Instagram account and a Facebook account, both at the Root of Knowledge. So we want to hear what you have to say, and we appreciate you guys coming along with us. We hope you learned something new, or at the very least had a thought, provoked a little bit of thinking. If we could do at least that, I think we've done a good thing. So you guys take it easy out there, and we'll see you later. Goodbye.